Step into the world of the unexplained with us. Here at Paranormal M, we bring you stories that'll challenge your beliefs and leave you with more questions than answers. Don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications to stay connected with our latest enigmatic narratives. We hope you have an eye-opening time listening. Story number 1. Thoughts about the paranormal. 0.0035%. That's how much a human eye can see from the entire electromagnetic spectrum. What is left, human brain fills that up from the information that it gets, including smell, taste, or sound. Speaking of sound, our hearing is also on the lower end, only from 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz. 1600 Hz. If you're an adult. Everything below or above that we basically just can't hear or experience. The world is full of colors, sounds, and smells that we cannot comprehend as a human species. What lies beyond our senses? Invisible forms, energy, spirits, paranormal. Thinking about paranormal, it strikes me weirdly that if the spectrum of our senses are so low, then can we even see if there is something? What is the usual evidence people brought up when talking about the paranormal? EVP sounds, pictures, stories, personal experiences? Think about this for a moment. If beyond our sense lies something that we cannot understand, or even have a clear idea about, how can we know about it? This fraction of reality we usually bring up when we try and say that I experienced something paranormal, or I saw something paranormal, or I heard something that I cannot explain. It all has to operate in the spectrum that we're capable of understanding and experiencing. Nothing can go beyond that. Why am I so keen to find something in the field? What basically is less than 1% of the reality that I do experience. How do I go deeper or break boundaries? Is it even possible? I'm not saying or suggesting that there's nothing beyond that, because quite the opposite. I believe everything is beyond this realm, which we perceive so little of. Sadly, the fact is that we, live in a reality that we can experience next to nothing. There is one place, though, where I can break reality, and that is in my dreams. People all around the world have experienced stuff in their dreams. This is not always just dreams that tell you the future, not dead relatives, no ghosts or time travelers, but ideas, inspirations, answers, and revelations. Dreams may be one of the most underrated places where we're doing our hunt for the paranormal. Maybe it is because we have been so used to the idea that dreams do not equal reality. We cannot bring anything from dreams to this world, aside from the vague memories that we got. What if the technology advances so that we can now document our dreams? Would you take it? Would I take it? There are reasons why nightmares stay inside of our head, and not so often carry out into the real world. Ones that do usually haunt me for months. Thought that by some futuristic dream-capturing machine I can bottle up that nightmare and look at it. Same time it terrifies me, at the same time the idea is sort of enchanting. What could I find from my dreams if I'd remembered them to, the finest of details? Another way I can experience something beyond my natural senses are to scramble up my brain via drugs. Psychedelic experiences are one of the most common subjects. Whenever I talk about anything paranormal or experiences beyond our natural spectrum. There is a catch, though. Because the brain is tricky, it shows something there that is not. I was a kid when last time had a wicked fever so bad that I saw things. I saw a bunch of toys cleaning up my room. Not much of an astounding paranormal experience thinking back. What is real in reality? What is paranormal in normal? I remember my friend who used all kinds of drugs when he was a young adult, and I always remember him telling me about his most traumatic experience. I won't go into details, but I can tell you about the aftermath. I remember him saying that he locked himself in his room at his school campus, and he wouldn't come out because he wasn't sure what was real and what was not. He said that the most horrifying thought about tripping balls was that the line between reality and not reality was suddenly gone. How could he, from the sound, sight, smells, disassociate and tell apart what was not real, because it all felt like living, breathing reality to him? He waited for a week for his brains to calm down, and then he could somehow tell what in fact was real and what was not. So maybe there's a part of my thought for today. Everything I can get out in English, because it's not my native language, so my ways of telling and explaining my experiences, thoughts, or ideas are sadly limited. Like our senses. Happy Halloween month, everybody. Stay safe, stay interested, stay in touch with reality, no matter how small it is for us. I like this guy. I want to read more from him. Story number 2. Left our family vacation a day early because of the ghosts. August this past year, my family stayed at an Airbnb in Purcellville. This was in Virginia, 10 minutes outside of Harper's Ferry. Look up the John Brown Raid, and about 45 minutes away from Gettysburg. The house itself is older than the town, built in 1752 and on a current working farm and vineyard. Here's the setup of the house. You enter into the oldest part of the home. You can see these two sections, kitchen and sitting room. They were the original cabin before past owners built on. Through the sitting room was a small library, another sitting area, and my parents' room. On the first floor, but off the ground outside. When you go up the stairs of the sitting room, there's a bathroom to the right, 2 doors in front of the stairs and a room to the left, over the kitchen. My husband and I stayed in this room over the kitchen as the bedroom sits directly in front of the stairs, and that gave me the creeps. It had the original fireplace in there. But something when I walked in just felt off. My sister and brother-in-law stayed on the floor above us, as that room has its own window AC unit. The house has no AC, just individual in-room units. We arrived on a Sunday. Monday morning, my dad asked me about footsteps from the night prior. He said he was sitting at the kitchen table on his computer and could hear footsteps walking through the house above him. My dad had also been making jokes and tends to be a little bit theatrical with his humor. Leading up to vacation, he was calling it Ghost Central, so I told him our room is above the kitchen and I wouldn't think anything of it. It was probably just one of the getting ready for bed type deals. He then mentioned that he thought he saw a bright light shining outside of his window and was tempted to look, but thought better of it. Again, my dad also has a history of wild dreams and sleepwalking, so I just brushed it off. Randomly, my husband asked me to help him move the crib from the other side of our room to be next to our bed. I didn't think anything of it, as he said it would just be quote-unquote easier because our room was so big. It was half the full length of the original cabin with only our bed at the far end of the room, opposite from the crib and the bathroom. On Tuesday, my dad's birthday, we sat in an old dining room for dinner. The room is a stunning, picturesque old farmhouse dining room with big windows, and this overlooked the field, the shed, and the barn, with the mountains around us. It was still light outside, about 5 p.m., while we were eating, and I looked outside the window and noticed the shed door seemed slightly ajar. I didn't think anything of it, but the next time I looked up, it looked more open, but slightly enough that I thought it was just me overthinking it. This happened several times. The door was more open, more closed, etc. I didn't want to scare my already anxious dad, so I texted my husband. "Can you go out and check the shed? The door keeps opening, I think." He checks his phone. When we both look up, we watch the shed door slowly open itself completely. And then just as slowly as it closed, it just closed itself shut. My husband went outside with my dad to check it out. No one was there. He locked the shed and said it shouldn't be open again, but it was weird that the door would both open and close itself like that. Wednesday, we were gone for the day in D.C., but on Thursday, we went to Gettysburg for the day, and my husband left after dinner to put the baby to bed, so I could do the ghost tour with my family. When we got home, my husband, who is naturally very skeptical of ghosts, and hyper-logical about everything, said that he heard footsteps upstairs when he got in. Now, my dad and sister had met the groundskeeper on a walk along the property earlier in the week, and my husband said that he was worried the guy was a weirdo walking around the house and maybe snooping while we were gone. Another thing about the house, by the way. Sounds do not travel. Sitting in the kitchen, you didn't get an echo or had to speak very loud and clear to someone to be in the next room. No acoustics. So we checked every room and closet to make sure nobody was in fact in the house. That's how loud the steps were. And he was a little spooked, but we decided not to say anything, because my family was making comments all week about the house, and we didn't want to upset anyone. That night, I thought I was starting to get paranoid. I was hearing a knocking above my head, and I thought I was smelling vanilla. On the ghost tour, we learned that the townspeople dealt with the smell of corpses for months. They were just post-wear. I don't know what that means. The smell of corpses for months post-wear. By dipping face masks in vanilla, lavender, and mint. I thought I was just spooked, and I did my best to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, always the first because I have my routine with our daughter, I noticed the kitchen cabinets were left open. I was confused, but just closed them. And while my daughter was taking a nap later that morning, I tapped the monitor and the camera rotated all the way down. I was really confused. Had I held it down? Am I overthinking it? My family decided to spend the day in Leesburg as our last full day before we left Saturday. At lunch, I mentioned the cabinets, and my dad said it might have been him. He got my mom a glass of water before bed, but we all just kind of went to bed after him. Then my sister mentioned that she woke up in a cold sweat at 3 a.m. She said she'd been having a really weird dream and thought she heard someone whisper into her ear, "Don't move." She said that before bed, her and her husband were watching more videos about Gettysburg and saw a bright flash of light outside the window. She even checked the weather, thinking maybe there was a lightning storm on the way or something. Then I looked at my husband and said, "Did you tell them about the footsteps?" He hadn't. He shared his story, and then said that he also woke up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat this morning. My sister also mentioned that she also hated the first bedroom. There was something about the fireplace that creeped her out the same way it gave me weird vibes. We all decided to keep that door shut all week without saying anything to each other about it. We were all stunned. My sister immediately started panicking, asking if we should leave. We were all on the fence about it. We were planning to leave Saturday at 6 a.m. regardless to get home and return to our rentals, but weren't entirely convinced. We finished our day out, came home, and began to pack up what we needed, and then went to dinner, with the plan to stay one more night. This is where everything got really weird. When we got home from dinner, the bedroom that we kept shut was cracked open, and then air coming out of it was so cold it was like standing directly in front of the AC. It was just my husband and I on the stairs, and we looked at each other. We quickly shut it before my sister came up, because we didn't want her to freak out. We put the baby to bed and I headed downstairs, because we all talked about having one last fire pit outside. My husband stayed with the baby until she fell asleep. But when I came downstairs, my family was huddled together, saying, "We need to go." My sister was really scared and didn't want to stay another night in their room. After some discussion, we all decided it'd be best to leave, and we were all only about 3 hours from home. We could sleep in our own beds before midnight. We got the cars loaded up relatively quickly, and I had to tell our daughter in our car seat and was talking to my sister with the car door open as the boys all did a final walk through the house. From the outside, you can see perfectly who's where in the house. I could see my dad walking into what was our room on the second floor with my husband, and I could see the flashlights scanning the top floor simultaneously where my sister and brother-in-law slept. My husband had his flashlight on when he went into the house, so I assumed it was him up there. After a few minutes, my dad throws out some final trash, and I see him half running and scuffling to the car and says, "Okay, time to go." We start heading down the driveway and turned to my husband and asked why he didn't just turn the lights on upstairs when he checked it. He said that he wasn't up there, that it was my brother-in-law. My dad yelled up the stairs and asked if my brother-in-law was up there, and my husband heard, "Yeah, I'm up here." At that point, my sister calls me. I asked her if the brother-in-law was upstairs to do a final sweep. He said no, he didn't go upstairs, and my dad, in their car, confirmed it. My dad said he yelled up the stairs, if he was there, and brother-in-law yelled from the first floor, "No, I'm in the kitchen." When everyone asked why, I told them what I saw. It was like someone was walking around the third floor with a flashlight scanning the room. My dad mentioned that when he went into my room to check it, his flashlight started to die, and when he stepped into the hallway it came back on. My husband agreed and shared that when he went into our room with my dad, he felt suddenly numb. And while my dad was locking the house up on the keypad, he started the 4-digit code. The house locked itself on the second number, and when he went to throw out the last bag of trash, his flashlight started to die again. That's when we all saw him shuffling to the car. Oh, and when we tried to find any information on the house, it's so old and historical, there's gotta be something, right? Well, we found nothing, except the 2020 Zillow listing from the last owner, who literally had 6-packed paragraphs of information about the house. And under, quote, "What the owner loves about the house," is one sentence. The house was a Civil War field hospital, and then goes on to talk about the homes, 66 acres, and nearby locations. Needless to say, after all of that, we all felt better about coming home and not spending another night. Sometimes I wonder if ghosts just get comfortable and familiar, and as more weird shit happened leading up to the night that we left, I wouldn't have been able to sleep that night. The owner texted my dad the next day to give checkout instructions, you could say. My dad said, "We left last night. I'm sure we're not the first one to tell you this, but your place is haunted." The owners were surprised and said that we were the first to say so, and asked what we experienced, and that it was a Civil War field hospital, per Zillow. They simply said, "Well, it definitely has its history," and asked us to leave a review. We didn't. Anyone have any interesting history on Purcellville during the Civil War? The Little Red-Headed Girl. I was 7 when I first went to sleepaway camp. Naturally, the camp had a lot of ghost stories. I've always been a believer in the supernatural and saw strange things when I was younger. The story I'm about to tell happened when I was 15 one summer night at camp. The camp used to be an all-boys boarding school, but is now a co-ed Marine-based camp sitting in the valley. As I mentioned before, when I was 7, I heard stories of ghosts who haunted the camp. These stories always scared me, but it didn't stop me from coming back to camp 5 times. I went when I was 7 to 10, and then 15 to 16. One particular story has always been very popular, which is the story of the little red-headed girl. It goes as follows. The headmaster of the boarding school would fly over the second school every year on his son's birthday and drop candy for the students from his airplane. One year, he took his young daughter and someone else in the plane. I don't remember who exactly, but tragically, the plane flew too low and clipped a eucalyptus tree and exploded in a fiery crash up in the canyon. Apparently, both bodies of the adults were found burned, and evidence showed that they died upon impact of the plane hitting the ground. But the body of the little girl was never found. To this day, stories of the people seeing and even talking to the little redhead girl are passed between campers. Apparently, she's known to walk the perimeter road of the camp, asking for her mommy and wanting to play. You know, the usual ghost kid stuff. The girl's quad is a rectangular building surrounding a dirt patch in the middle. Once grassy, but drought killed most of it. This particular year, I was in a cabin, and it was known as the Owl. Owl's one whole side of the rectangle and had a cement patio out back with clotheslines for campers to hang their wet swimsuits and towels. Owl also shared a large communal bathroom with a couple of stalls and sinks. My cabin consisted of 10 girls in total. We all slept in bunk beds in one room. I chose a bottom bunk because I knew from previous years that the room would get very hot, and the lower you were to the ground, the cooler you would be while sleeping. Unfortunately, I wasn't the first in the room, so I ended up with the only bed in the room that didn't back up to a wall on more than one side. Basically, the bed was in the middle of the room and was directly next to the door leading to the back patio. I've always felt more comfortable sleeping next to a wall that I can back up against, but I wasn't too upset because I felt safe in a room with so many other people. One night I woke up because I had to pee. I got up and stumbled my way out of the cabin and out onto the front patio on the quad side and walked to the bathroom. There was a small clock hung on a wooden pillar in the quad, and I remember it displaying that it was sometime between 3 and 4 in the morning. I stepped into the cold tiled bathroom and turned on the bright white fluorescent lights, which were accompanied by a loud whirring fan sound. I sat down on the toilet and was snapped out of my groggy state by the cold toilet seat. I did my business and began walking back to my room. At this point, I was just excited to crawl back into my sleeping bag and wasn't really thinking about anything scary possibly happening. As I opened the door to my cabin, my eyes were adjusting to the darkness of the room and I could only see the windows. The curtains were always open so the breeze could blow through, and so the only light in the room at night was from the moonlight. Sorry if my storytelling skills are really bad. Even thinking about this still creeps me out, though. And what I saw made me freeze out of pure fear. In the window, I saw a short figure with small hands with fingers that ended up in a spike, pressing its hands and face up toward the window. I couldn't move for what felt like a minute, but in reality, I quickly got into my bed as my heart was racing and tears began to well up in my eyes. I told myself it must be a prank. Maybe the counselors or some boys had cut out a piece of paper and stuck it into the window. After 5 minutes of sitting in bed, wondering what I should do, I saw one of my cabin mates, who I'm going to call Nikki, turn over in her top bunk bed. Quietly, I whispered, "Nikki, you awake?" "Yeah," she responded. "There's someone in the window," I whispered. Nikki was confused and asked me what I was even talking about. I told her to look at the window next to Ellen's bed. She said there was nothing there. At this point, I started to cry out of the realization that this most likely wasn't a prank and began to spiral into a full-blown panic attack. Other girls in the cabin started to wake up due to the commotion and asked what happened. What happened after that wasn't super important, but I ended up sleeping in my friend Patricia's bed with her for the rest of the night. In the morning, I explained to the rest of the girls what happened, with some believing me and some not. They didn't think I was lying, they just didn't believe the story had happened, as I described it. I told my counselor and other counselors, and it wasn't until then that I was reminded of the story. I also went outside to look for any evidence of some being there, or maybe some dust being wiped away on a dirty screen, but nothing. I also determined that the height of that person standing in the window would have had to have been around the waist to chest level on me. I didn't experience anything for the rest of my camp experience, but for the rest of the time I tried to avoid getting up at night, and when I entered the room after sunset, I would purposely not look at the window out of fear that whoever or whatever I saw would come back. Story number 4. Strange coincidence or not. Not safe for work warning. You've been warned. I moved into this house in the spring. It's a fairly new building. I live here with several roommates, but as far as I know, I'm the only one with any of these experiences. To be fair, not all that much has happened. The weirdest thing is that I'll have a ceiling fan that's light will randomly turn off and on. But in a way, it's not completely random, because there's been lots of nights where I'll almost fight it because I'll turn it off and it'll switch right back on again a half a second later, and repeat this cycle for a bit until it eventually stops again. The fan also will turn up to max speed. One night I thought perhaps there was something wrong with the fan remote, so I took the batteries out of the remote only to have it continue to occur, much to my horror. To combat this, I turned the light on the fan as dim as it would go, so that when it does kick on, it doesn't always wake me up, but occasionally, and less often, it will turn on and then ramp up all the way to its brightest setting. If it were just this, I would perhaps say, freak electrical thing. But this morning I woke up to a rhythmic tap. I've had a house that had a woodpecker before, so I know what that sounds like. As is, the screens are on the outside of my windows, making it difficult to hit the window first. Actually, this tap sounded almost like it was coming right from my desk at the foot of my bed. Though that desk is situated right by a window, so it also sounded like it could be coming from the window itself. As I mentioned, the tap was rhythmic, like a drumming pattern. For those of you who consider yourself visual, I'll do my best to tap the rhythm. Notation. Okay, your narrator's going to attempt this. It continued like this a few times, and would occasionally change the drum line slightly, but it always sounded like nails tapping out a clear rhythmic beat. I sat and listened for a bit, staring and looking for something to make it make sense before I accidentally knocked something off the edge of my bed, which made a small noise, and then the tapping stopped. Pretty much the only conclusion I have for this at this point is that someone was outside my window. Story number 5. My first true experience with the paranormal. Just a little backstory on me is that I truly love the paranormal and always have. I've been a close follower of the spooky and weird ever since I was a kid. That being said, I never really have had a true paranormal experience. I've dabbled with Ouija boards and gotten a little bit spooked from that. I maybe saw a shadow or two, nothing super verifiable, but the other night I had something happen to me that I'm really having a hard time explaining rationally. I was laying in my bedroom with my girlfriend, just having a casual conversation and letting my feet dangle off the bed. Mid-conversation, I felt a full-on tug on my foot. Having just recently put my son to bed, I was expecting him to be standing there, wanting a glass of water, something he often asks for around bedtime. Turning around, I was just staring straight out the doorway into the hall. There was nothing there at all. Following my puzzlement, I hear something all parents dread hearing: their child screaming. I rush into his room and see him sitting straight up out of his bed, tears streaming down his cheeks and pointing to the corner of his room. I asked, "What's wrong?" All he replies with is, "Something is in the corner. It's a monster." I start to react a second because I too just had an encounter, but I put on my parenting hat and reassure him that nothing was there and to go back asleep. I go back into my bedroom where my girlfriend and I are a little bit shaken, to say the least. These two events happening back to back like that absolutely cannot just be a coincidence. We try to debunk what had just happened, but came up short. Story number 6. The doll waved goodbye. Years ago I had an ex, and we shared a love for the spooky and paranormal. She would often go to thrift shops and secondhand stores and buy anything that she felt looked old and creepy and possibly haunted. She picked up a little doll that had tattered hair and the plastic was all worn and yellowed from age. She would swear to me that it was haunted and that it would move its arms on its own. One day she calls me on FaceTime saying the doll was being weird, and she was holding the doll, and lo and behold, the doll actually moved its arms. Now, my ex had a reputation of trying to prank me, so I didn't really even think much of it at the time, but it was fun to go along and be spooked, you know? Months later, I'm dog-sitting for her while she was out of town, and I go to let the dog out, and I notice the little doll on the shelf with both arms down at its side. Couldn't help myself and taunted a little and said, "All right, go ahead, just me and you. Raise your arms." Nothing happened, of course, and I continued with my dog-sitting duties. As I left, I was putting the dog away and turned off all the lights, and I happened to look at the shelf. The doll had its right arm raised, as if saying goodbye. I'll never forget that. I had a paranormal experience. Disappearing, reappearing object with possible deeper meaning. I keep a running to-do list all the time in my front pants pocket. I am obsessive about it. Especially on Friday morning, September 29th, 2023. It was nowhere to be found. I knew it was safe and sound in my home on Thursday night because the last thing before going to bed, I wrote on it to buy mouthwash. Not finding it in its usual place, and after extensive searching, including even checking garbage cans, I gave up. On Monday, October 2nd, it showed up in the exact spot it was supposed to be in the front pants pocket that I had been searching through thoroughly. And I mean thoroughly. I was grabbing my new list to add an item and pulled out the old one by surprise. To me, this was a perfect 0% chance of me just missing it exactly in its expected location. I live alone, have no pets beyond an aquarium. Don't think the fish did it. I read on the forums. I visit many stories of things disappearing and then being found in exactly the same location where they were last placed. Of course, I half believe and half say, yeah, like you're probably doing with me. I do believe this is the repertoire of the spirit world. But here's where my story gets a bit deeper. On Thursday, September 28th, 2023, I was the victim of an online scam. A clever scam where I thought I was talking to PayPal, a legitimate company that I do financial business with. But in reality, it was an overseas scammer that really wasn't PayPal. In correcting a situation, I was scammed out of a very substantial amount of money. I won't go into the complicated details, but point is, when I went to bed Thursday night, I didn't know this was a scam, and I had a note on that very to-do list to send them an additional, very substantial sum. On Friday morning, I just grew suspicious and called the real PayPal and determined that this was all a scam. Now, the physical paranormal event, the disappearing, reappearing to-do list, that I'm 100% sure happened. Any further meaning behind this can only be that my honest speculation is happening. My late dad was always the financial astute and interested person in my family. I'm actually very financially comfortable to this day, not because of my brain's savvy or effort, but because of my dad. I believed very strongly that he's been in a very active and involved spirit already since his death, and has always been very concerned and involved with financial things when alive. So maybe that was happening to me through him. The St. Louis exorcism case was a mentally ill kid, probably autistic, having meltdowns. Since nobody knew what was going on with him or how to handle him, they called the church in a last-ditch effort, and the church said that he was possessed. And then the folklore was born. He threw his desk on the floor in a rage. If you've ever seen autistic kids rage, a skinny autistic kid could bring a bookshelf down if they try hard enough. The folklore said that he threw it onto the ceiling. He scratched himself bloody in a self-harming episode. Folklore said Satan scratched him. He screamed and growled the same Latin language that he heard the clergy using. Folklore said he was speaking in tongues. All this tells me that he was having a meltdown, and since autism was just starting to gain recognition as a condition in the US, they didn't know about it yet. Lots of children in history going back to the Middle Ages were called possessed because they had mental or developmental problems. Before you argue, I'm autistic. I'm a specialist, and I've spent years researching this case. Mysterious explosions and unexplained noises. To start, I live on and off at my dad's farm, located in rural southern Brazil. The farm is located on what used to be a limestone quarry some 30-odd years ago. A few remnants of that still remains strewn about the farm, such as an old minecart and its tracks, a huge brick limestone furnace thing, some overgrown dirt paths where trucks used to drive, and some factory walls and equipment. The nearest town is about a 5-minute drive away, and has around 10,000 people in it, consisting mostly of nice, simple country folk. Most of the farm is a big forest area, because it's a fazenda de reflorestamento, meaning that we sell trees and plant them again and such. The following events are in chronological order, although I can't pinpoint the exact day and month where some stuff took place. Before I moved back here this year, I'd spent the first half of 2022 here and moved back to my hometown for the later half of my final year of high school. My mom and brother lived with me back in her hometown as she was waiting for my brother to finish that year of middle school and for me to finish high school to move to the farm and join my dad and my older sister, who were already living there full time. It was a cold night in early November of last year when my dad told me that he and his sister were woken up by 2 large explosions in the woods behind our house. My dad, having been a gun owner, this is written crazy. My dad, having been a gun owner, is well aware of the noise that weapons can make, and said that this was nowhere near a gunshot and more along the realm of some sort of explosive detonation. The whole house seemed to be shaking and to be vibrating, and the windows also shook in a very intense way. Our guard dogs were woken up and started barking like crazy at the direction where the noise was coming from, but they did not move. At first, I was quite skeptical of what my father and sister had been believing or been telling me, believing it was nothing more than a bit of a tall tale to scare me, my brother who was just moving into town, and by that the farm. Until a couple of months later in early 2023, when my mom, my brother, and my sister had to go back to her house for a bit and my dad was traveling for work, were woken up by those same explosions that my father had described. I was laying in bed preparing to fall asleep when it happened, and it seemed like someone had blown up a gas tank a couple of meters from the house. The window shook, and I desperately tried grabbing my phone to record some sound if there was another explosion. But in the pitch darkness of my room and the desperation of not knowing what was going on made me forget I'd left it plugged at the outlet and it was across the room from my bed. A second explosion, and once again the walls and windows shake. I exited my room just to find my brother and mom had done the same thing, both standing in the living room. My brother, who's 14, was visibly frightened by what had just happened and was telling everyone to be quiet just in case whatever had made that explosion could hear us. Me, being the paranormal and extraterrestrial fanatic, really wanting to look out the back window to see what made that noise, but instead did what I thought would be the safest option. Closed every window and curtain in the house that was still opened. I did not want to see whatever made that noise, my mind trailing off into stories of aliens and skinwalkers and such, so I decided that it would be better off not looking than accidentally catching a glimpse of what, if anything, was out there in the pitch-black darkness of the woods behind my house. While closing one of the blinds, I caught a glimpse of one of the guard dogs just sitting in the front garden, looking up, as if over the house to something in a tree canopy behind it. It was quite difficult to go back to sleep that night, but nothing more happened that day. Talking to my dad about what I had experienced, he said the explosions that we had heard were just the same as the ones that he had heard in November. Nothing weird has happened for a while, when one day, late at night, my mother was woken up by a very loud jet engine-like noise. By the way, we don't live near any major airports, and the planes that do fly over us are very high up, so we can't really hear them. And it seemed to be coming from the top of our house, and only seemed to be getting louder and louder until it ceased instantly. Curiously, no one else was woken up that night. I also had one of these experiences with the loud jet engine noise myself. It was around 2 a.m. and I was laying down in the living room couch, playing Fallout New Vegas, doing the Boomer quest line, when I start hearing what I can only describe as if a plane was flying past your house but never actually went anywhere, so all you heard was the same noise and it wouldn't stop. I was wearing headphones, so firstly I thought it was coming from the in-game, but when I removed them I could still hear it and it sounded like it was coming from on top of the house. Freaked out by this, I saved my game and turned off all the lights and went to my room to be safe or something along those lines, when it suddenly stopped. We've had some other experiences at this farm, like my parents and seemingly our dogs seeing a quote-unquote ghost kid run past the house and disappear into the forest. Our neighbor telling us about how she and her dad found some sort of Brazilian folklore beast called the Corpo Seco, which is basically a zombie, dead body sort of being that wanders around the forest, along with some creepy stories from people that have lived around this area for longer than I have. Me and some of my family members have had some other paranormal experiences happen to us, but so far, those are the only ones that happened since we moved here. Story number 10. Ghost played with my hair when I was younger. So this was a couple of years ago. Not too much, like around 5 or 6 maybe. So when I was younger, it took me some time to fall asleep. So I would just stare at the ceiling and think about different stuff. And I share a room with my sister. She's younger though, and I heard her sleeping, so it wasn't her. And I also have 2 brothers. But they were 2 years old at the time, so of course they were sleeping, and my bed was higher off the ground, around 1 meter high. So that night, I was waiting to fall asleep. When suddenly I hear someone in my room. I don't remember that anybody opened the door, though. And it was an adult. Whoever that was pretty tall. He or she didn't have to use a ladder to reach me, so it wasn't a kid. So at first I thought that this was my mom or dad to check in on me if my sister is sleeping, or to open the window. So I pretend that I was asleep, but it was really dark, so I opened my eyes, but I only saw a shadow, not a face. Of course, because it was dark. And it was really close to me, and I thought that my mom, but it wasn't. That thing took some of my hair and started brushing them on my cheeks, like with a paintbrush. So that weren't my parents, because why would they bother a kid in the middle of the night when I'm supposed to be asleep? And I asked them, and they said no. Plus, they usually sleep as soon as my brothers fall asleep. So later that thing went to my legs. The ceiling is low there because there's a roof that's, lower. And that thing, fat there, perfectly straight. I believe they mean sat. That part was also around a meter tall, so an adult should, sit down or, kneel down there to be that, thing was standing up straight there. Sorry, guys. The writing is brutal. And after that, I don't remember a thing. And I know that it was real, it wasn't a dream. So that was a ghost, right? Hard to say on it. Story number 11. Saw a very sinister entity at the foot of the bed. For context, this was years ago, but I decided I'd like to start recounting my experiences, and this seemed like a nice enough community to do that with. My boyfriend at the time and I were moving, so things were in boxes and the bed was taken apart. He always had insomnia, but I usually fell right asleep. This night things felt off. I was tossing and turning for a good 30 to 40 minutes. He finally asked what was up. Said it was nothing, but he pressed, and I finally said, "Well, I don't know, I just keep thinking I'm seeing something in the shadows." He pushed for me to say more, which was unlike him. I finally started describing this thing. It was probably 7 feet tall, dark blue, almost black, defined large muscles, and sharp teeth. He cut me off and asked, "Is it dripping and slimy looking?" I said, "Yeah." "Is it breathing really heavy and staring right at me?" He said, "Yeah." He said he saw it too, and he thought it was impatiently waiting for something. But then he didn't want to talk about it anymore. I found out later through a friend that knew him as a teenager that he had a weird history with a place out in the country called Stone Church. She described him as a shy kid that didn't have any friends, kinda emo and desperately wanted to be liked by the cool kids at school. She said for fun, one night they went out to this abandoned church that was supposed to be haunted, and did something like Bloody Mary or played with the Ouija board. Sorry, I don't remember the specifics. And crazy things started happening. At one point the door swung shut and locked him in a room. She couldn't get in for a few hours, but when he came out he seemed different. This was not the guy I knew at all, by the way. She said the next day he was forever a changed guy. He was super charismatic and made friends everywhere he went. They were like his followers. Until she mentioned it, I never really realized how much they seemed to worship him. He refused to talk about it, and she clammed up. Didn't want to say anything about it anymore after that. Weird experience when I was in 5th grade. When I was in 5th grade, my dad and brother went to Michigan to visit my grandparents. I didn't want to go. My mom was staying home anyways, so they let me stay with her. This is only relevant because some people might think it was a video that my brother was just watching. I was just chilling looking at my phone when I heard a little boy's voice say, "Hey, and giggle. It was followed by a woman who was also just starting to giggle. I distinctly remember being paralyzed with fear. When I was finally able to move, I just got up and ran to where my mom was sleeping. I woke her up and she listened to it and was like, "What is that?" I said I didn't know, and she listened even more for a bit before falling asleep. At this point, the giggles and the "hey, hey" were like super loud, but then they stopped and I never heard it again. I brought it up to my mom a few years later. She says she remembers that, and it was probably just a coyote. Coyotes can make superhuman-like sounds sometimes, as well as some of the birds in this area, I guess. But I've never heard them say, "hey," or giggle. I know I didn't just make up what I heard because this is an isolated incident. It's strange enough, though, because I've went about her just crying about all these weird noises, and none of the events really stuck out as memorable to her or me. Just this specific one. Never happened to me again, and no animal noises sounded similar to that night. Honestly, when I type it, the story seems really fake because the fact that kids giggling and saying hi is just so cliche in ghost stories. Makes even me think it's not real. I also live in the Appalachian region, and it's not really that relevant to any sort of folktale or urban legends. But I thought it was a cool experience, and I also thought it'd be nice to hear from people interested in this topic. Story number 13. 2 creepy encounters in a row. So I'm in the Navy, and me and my coworker recently moved into a military housing apartment together about 2 months ago. Everything's been fine so far, except for this weekend. Due to our shifts, we tend to be home at different times, and this was the case both yesterday and today. Yesterday, as I was home sitting in my room with my door cracked open, I saw a dark shadow flit out of my coworker's room out of the corner of my eye. I also had a funky feeling ever since I got home that day, but dismissed it because, as I said, we had been there 2 months already and nothing had happened. Now what happened today is what really freaked me out. So once I got to my shift to report for my shift, my coworker asked me how I was able to get there before him. When I asked him what he meant, he told me that he got to the apartment about 40 minutes after I had left. But he had thought that I was sleeping because he heard breathing coming from the room as if I was sleeping in my bed. In addition to what he told me when I left the house today, I also had another weird feeling in the back of my mind that someone or something was about to whisper my name as I was leaving. Whatever lived there did not like me. Stories from an estate agent. I've been working as a property agent in the UK for the past 8 years, selling and renting all sorts of property. And over the years, I've had quite a few experiences that I couldn't quite explain, and I thought I'd share one of them. This story happened around November of 2018. I remember because earlier that day, a colleague and I had started filming that year's Christmas videos to go on our company's social media. Each year, we'd recreate a scene of a Christmas movie, and that year was the dance scene from Love Actually. Anyway, I'd been asked by my manager to go and take photos of a house that we'd just been given the go-ahead to go on and rent. The house was a 3-bedroom grade 2, listed mid-terraced from around the 16th century. For anyone not knowing, a grade 2 listed property basically means it's old and has a lot of original features that can't be changed without special permissions. This was the first time we'd let the property for the landlord. And the tenant before we later found out had left the property whilst still in contract within the first 6 months. I knew something wasn't right as soon as I set foot in the property. Everyone gets times when the vibes are off, and I'm not someone who claims to be in touch with their spiritual side. But the atmosphere when I went in was downright hostile. I was already a little spooked, but damn it, I had a job to do, so I opened the playlist on Spotify, hit shuffle, and started turning lights on. I have a system when photographing a property. Lights on, photograph, measure the room, lights off. The house was your standard layout. Living room, kitchen, dining room downstairs, 3 bedrooms, bathroom upstairs with another flight of stairs up to the loft, attic for my American friends. The downstairs I did just fine, trying to ignore the bad vibes by singing along to probably ABBA or something that I don't remember. What I do remember, though, is my trip upstairs. As soon as my foot hit the first step, this overwhelming urge that something was wrong surged through my body. I started singing louder, trying to distract myself, and another few steps up, wham, another huge surge of fear. I tell myself that the upstairs must have been in some sort of dead zone, because it was at this stage that my phone decided that the songs had no problem playing 10 minutes ago suddenly needed buffering, meaning my ABBA was now playing in fits and starts. I fought against my body to get to the top of the stairs. When I did, my eyes were drawn to the door to the attic stairs, which lay ajar, and as soon as I did, I was done for. The room beyond the doorway was cloaked in darkness due to the lack of lights being turned on, and the fear that was pulsing through my body took me over. I stood there paralyzed. Couldn't even blink, take my eyes off the shadows that lay beyond the doorway. My lungs became like cement as I struggled to catch my breath. My words, breathless. I stood there for what felt like an hour before my phone started to ring. It was the office. We have office protocol to check in if we've been gone longer than expected. I fumbled to find the answer button, eyes still fixed to the darkness. I hit answer and managed to struggle out a help. This house was walking distance to the office, so it wasn't long before my colleague arrived to check up on me. As soon as I heard his voice call out my name, I felt the weight lift immediately and I cried out his name in response. I ran downstairs to meet him and the music returned far too loud, which gave us both a shock. We both got the hell out of there, not even checking if the door was locked properly. It was one of those Yale locks that auto-lock when you pull them, so it was probably fine. We head back to the office. On the walk back, I noticed a pain shooting across my back. When we got back to the office itself, I checked to see 3 long scratches running diagonally across my back. I explained what had happened to the others in the office. My manager told us that she had had a similar feeling when she met the landlord. Maybe because she was with someone that wasn't as scary, but after that we made sure that whenever we visited that property, we were always accompanied. I'm not sure what happened to the house in the end. Surprise, surprise, we struggled to find people who could live in that bad vibe house, and the landlord gave it to another agent to try to sell. Not long after, I moved to another company as well, and onto other properties. Story number 15. Sleep paralysis. I, a 19-year-old female, just had sleep paralysis for the first time ever. Always have heard of people who have had it and whatnot. Just curious if anyone knows what the cause of it is. Is it going to happen again? I don't know, just a little spooked. Context. A little before I was getting ready to fall asleep, I got scared and turned my phone light on. Sometimes I do that because I, quote-unquote, feel like something is there, kind of in the darkness. Usually it's just me psyching myself out, and I'm usually able to turn my light back off. But eventually I found myself turning it back on after a few minutes of having it off. Again, I didn't think too much of it because usually I'm fine. Anyways, I finally drift off to sleep and my whole body goes into like a state of shock. I could just feel chills all throughout my body and it came in waves, but it was significantly stronger at some points. So I kept praying to God to get whatever it was away. Eventually it stops, so I open my eyes, assuming it's over. And next thing you know, I'm seeing what looked like an older lady floating in my closet. But when I saw her face, it wasn't a face, it was just kind of blackness. Once she turned towards me, she started reaching out to me. At this point, I'm freaking out, trying to move, scream, do whatever I can to make it go away, but I couldn't move or do anything. Seconds before her hand could touch me, another arm from the floor grabbed the lady's arm and stopped her from touching me. And when I looked again at my closet, the spirit that grabbed her from touching me was holding this lady like in a bear hug, keeping her contained. The other spirit, or whatever it was dressed in white, but their face was covered in like a hijab, but their mouth was also covered. So I could only see their eyes. Then I became unparalyzed. Story number 16. Experiences throughout my life. My earliest experience that I can remember is when I was only about 10. My mother was the neighborhood mom to all, and that means all the kids. Although we weren't well off, she managed to make every child feel like, taken care of which included giving some sort of a place to stay if they needed it. My brother had a friend whose mom had passed away. He was always at her house. Even though his grandmother lived a block down, he slept there, ate there, and he was in a nutshell just another member of our home. Me being young and knowing nothing of his mother, not who she was, what she looked like, or her name, I asked him why he was always there. He told me his mom had passed away from being sick, and that our house was his home away from home. We made him feel like family. As time went on, he pretty much permanently lived there. Even when my blood older siblings moved out, he was still there. One night I had a dream. In the dream, I was sitting on the couch playing N64. It had just come out. There was a knock on the door. I was the only one home and knew better than to answer it. But for whatever reason, I did. There was a woman. She was short, had black hair with bangs sunken in face, but you could tell she had high cheeks, not the best of teeth. She just had a really sad look to her eyes. Is he here? I was unsure of the he, because there were 3 males in my house. I asked who. She replied, "My son, I haven't seen him in a long time, and I know he's here a lot, and I miss him." Although I was dreaming, even in my dream, not knowing who this was, I just knew who she was referring to. I said, "No, he's not here. Do you want me to tell him to go to his grandma's house if he comes here?" She replied, "No, I'll make sure to find him soon. If he comes here, tell me I miss him and I love him. I'm sorry there's so much missing, so much no one knows." I woke up abruptly. I had this overwhelming sense of sadness. I just remember thinking, what the hell just happened? I've never had a dream like that. I didn't know how to make sense of it. Eventually, my adopted without the court siblings came home. "Hey, do you have a picture of your mom?" He looked at me with a confused look on his face. "No, I don't. Mom wasn't around much, and I hadn't seen her in a long time. Why? Why are you asking that?" I told him I had a dream about a woman. I think it was her. The look on his face has always sat with me. "What did she look like?" I sat quiet for a minute and asked again that time, more like a tell me right now sort of a tone. She was short, black shorter hair, sunken in eyes. Her teeth were kind of dirty. The look on his face told me everything. I needed to know. This was real. He immediately started asking questions. What'd she say? What'd she do? Where'd the dream take place? I said, "She said that she misses you. she hasn't seen you in a long, long time and that she's sorry there's so much missing that no one knows. What does that mean? The stuff missing and the no one knows. He cried, and when I say cried, he cried hard. He said, I don't know, but if you dream about her again, tell me. Tell her to visit me at mine, please. Tell her see me in my dreams. And if she can't, please tell her I miss her. I never dreamt of her again, though. He never spoke on this again, either. Years later, I'm reading a news article on a serial killer that was never caught. I'm choosing not to state what the name of the killer was for my own personal reasons, but I assure you it can be found on Google with a very quick search. As I'm skimming the article, I see the woman. It was her. She didn't have the same last name, though, so this being about 20 years back and me needing clarification who else I would call, but my mother, of course. My mother explains some things and says that there was a serial killer that killed a specific group of women. This woman's body was never found, but they suspected due to her background and who she was affiliated with that she was in fact a victim of this killing spree. I now understood that there's so much no one knows and so much missing part. I then told my mother the conversation, which I had never done before, and also explained what he had said, that his mother was sick and how that she passed. Her only response was, would you want to tell everybody about the lifestyle your mother lived? After that dream, I've had many more throughout my life. Things of this nature, dreaming of things that were going to happen and that absolutely did. That first experience left me wide open to so many more experiences in my future. I've always tried to embrace it. The only person I've been 100% open with telling my experience to is my now boyfriend of 2 years. Since our first weeks together, he's always told me I've had a gift, and to learn to use it, embrace it harder. I see things. I hear things. I speak things into existence. Story number 17. Out of the Back Room. I moved out of my mom's when I was 16. I found out I was pregnant, and I thought I was grown. Fast forward a few years, and lo and behold, reality slapped me just as it does any young parent, and after some trials and tribulations, found myself back home with my mom at the age of 19. I'll preface this with, the apartment my mother lived in was a nursing home converted into 6 apartments. 3 on the first floor, 2 on the second, and my mother's apartment being the only one on the 3rd floor. We always heard things. Footsteps coming up a long staircase leading to my mother's door. Never anyone there. The back door was a huge fire door. Banged when it shut. Very distinctive sound. We would hear footsteps, hear the door open and close and expect someone. There's never anyone there. When you walked through the back door, it was a short hallway, 2 doors to the left, bedrooms, and 1 doorway ahead in the kitchen. My bed was positioned to face my bedroom doorway. My mother worked overnights. She's a nurse, so it was always my 2 going on 3-year-old son, I always home alone at night. Can't explain the feeling I got walking past the first of the 2 doors to the left, but I just couldn't walk past them, so I ran every time. I just ran. My first experience ever in the apartment was my scariest one to date. From when I was younger to now being in my 30s. One night I'm laying in bed. I'm on the phone very late. It's maybe 1 to 2 a.m. and as I'm laying there just talking, I heard pitter-patter across the short hallway, and a short, toddler-sized shadow ran across my doorway. I saw the shadow clearly. It had shape, it had mass, it was solid. I immediately yell out to my son, "Hey, what are you doing? Come here." No response. So again, him being little and me knowing his games, I call out to him again, "Hey bub, come here and lay with mama." Then it hit me. He wouldn't be in that part of the apartment. That came from the corner bedroom. He was sleeping on the couch. I got up as quickly as I think I ever have and run through the kitchen and into the living room. There he was, my toddler, sleeping on the couch. I scooped him up and hightailed it to my room. I shut the door behind me, lock it, and crash! Something hit the kitchen floor and sounded like it shattered. I did not leave my room all night. Eventually early hours hit and I finally fell asleep with my baby in bed with me. Fast forward and it's now 7:30 a.m. My mother is knocking at the bedroom door. "What the fuck happened in the kitchen? The entire dish strainer's on the floor. There's glass everywhere." I was hesitant to even answer. My mom did not like to speak on these things. She says she's a non-believer, but no way in hell she could be living here. I explained what happened, and she only said, "Help me clean it up." From there on out, so many things happened. Every day there was an occurrence. Voices, sounds, things that looked like people in the house that we would quickly realize weren't, or who we thought it was. I never slept comfortably in that house again, and very quickly made my way out of that place into my own. But without fail, every visit I had my mother consisted of someone from the other side making their presence known one way or another.